Hey folks, welcome back to another episode of the Texas SignalCast. I'm your host, Joe Desotel, and I'm here with my co-host, Jessica Montoya Coggins. Hello, Jessica.
Hey, Joe.
So it seems like Dan Patrick has been very jealous of all the attention that Greg Abbott has been getting, even though most of it has been negative. Dan Patrick seems to have made quite a few headlines this week and some of the crazy stuff that he's done. So I guess let's start with the lieutenant governor this time around. So we just wrapped up the third special session, and the legislature passed the voting maps. There were gerrymandered districts from the school board and or I guess the SBOE, which is the State Board of Education, the Texas State Senate, the Texas House, and the U.S. congressional maps for the state of Texas. Lots of problems. MALDEF has already filed a lawsuit, and I'm sure there'll be many, many more lawsuits. However, Dan Patrick is not done. He is calling for a fourth special session because he wants to tackle President Trump's election audit bill. He wants to bring that back up. More harsher penalties for illegally casting votes, and even more anti-trans bills. Basically, I don't know if you saw that, but so these are the three things that Dan Patrick feels like are just business that is undone and needs to be completed before the next election.
Yeah, it was, I think, a little surprising. Most people, I think, when they did correct me if I'm mispronouncing this again, because I've been doing this, the sine die, that is the sine die, the end of the session. And I think people were even, wishing folks, happy Thanksgiving, Merry Christmas, because as for folks who forgot, I guess we're not allowed to say Merry Christmas until President Trump made that possible again. But this was kind of like, it's sort of like, school's out of session, we'll see you when we see you. And this hasn't been enough for Dan Patrick, and especially you have former President Trump, who has been calling for a full audit of Texas. Right now we're doing an audit of 4 large counties, but he would like a full audit, like they did in Arizona, which again reaffirmed that Joe Biden won that state, and actually won it by even a larger margin that they discovered. So yeah, this, I guess, puts him at odds with Abbott, who has made it kind of clear that this last session was the last, especially indicated by the fact that he actually named a new Secretary of State for Texas. We had been operating without one since Ruth Hughes stepped down back in May.
Yeah, and the sad thing is, the reason that guy stepped down is because basically he said that the election was secure and there was nothing wrong with it, and it seemed like he wasn't towing the party line. Like, he was supposed to say, I don't know, I did a terrible job, and I screwed this whole thing up, and we need to investigate every single vote that's been cast in Texas and make sure that no funny business was happening. It's unclear what they wanted him to do or say. But as we saw with Georgia, the entire party infrastructure turned against the Secretary of State there because he simply just wouldn't say that he, oversaw a negligent election. And he didn't, just because Democrats won there. And yeah, it is even stranger in Texas, since Trump won Texas, that there was a lot of pressure for our Secretary of State to say that we need all these new extra voting laws, which we clearly don't. But this new person is that type of MAGA Trump person. As a matter of fact, he helped Trump to try to overturn the election in Pennsylvania in 2020. So he was one of Trump's attorneys briefly to try to overturn the election. So of course he'd be a perfect fit for Greg Abbott to appoint here in Texas moving forward, given all the shenanigans that are going on. He was even working under Abbott back when Abbott was the attorney general. He fought to defend the voter ID law at the time, the Texas voter ID law, which federal courts had found to be discriminatory, and district courts actually found it to be intentionally discriminatory. And so Yeah, we're moving ahead in time. It's now 2021, but we're moving backwards in a lot of ways when it comes to the types of people that we're putting in charge of our government.
Right. So this individual who Abbott appointed as Secretary of State, who is the chief elections officer of our state, his name is John Scott, and he was a part of Trump's legal team to try and overturn the Pennsylvania results. He did actually ultimately withdraw from that case, along with Republican State Senator Brian Hughes. I think maybe there was like some fear that you really might be disbarred for filing such a frivolous lawsuit. But no, he is, as you mentioned, Abbott's pick here. And because Abbott did this after the special session ended, this did not require any Senate approval. I believe you need 2/3 approval. Some Republicans, said he might not have passed it. I'm a little skeptical on that, but this is now our interim Secretary of State, and he will be here for November 2022.
Yeah.
Unless something extraordinary happens.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear that he wait. I mean, he literally waited a couple of days after the session to appoint this guy. So it was very clear that they could not get them through the Senate if they wanted to. And of course, all these things would have come up if that was something they tried to do. And Democrats were obviously not going to support somebody like this, and so this is just more usurping the democratic process to put in their people, no matter how bad they are. And this is just another example of that. And so, again, you were talking about that's a Senate thing. And so Dan Patrick, who is technically the president of the Senate, I think this is a good time to mention that a while back we talked about how he said he was going to put up $1 million to seed a bounty for anyone who had information that led to somebody being convicted of voter fraud. So finally, this week, the very first check has been written. A $25,000 check went out to a guy in Pennsylvania who found and complained about what he saw as voter fraud, and then it turned out that this person was in fact convicted of voter fraud. It was a Trump supporter who voted for himself and then illegally voted on behalf of his son, who is a registered Democrat. And so you can only imagine how he probably voted on behalf of his Democrat son. He probably voted for Trump. He wanted to get an extra vote for Trump to make up for all those illegal votes that's going on in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia, which is what the line was at the time. And then, of course, they did the audits or they did recounts in Pennsylvania and all that. And they found that, we did, in fact, win the election despite some of these illegal Trump votes that took place.
I'm just very happy for that individual. I hope that they do do something special with that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's really funny because, it's certainly not the outcome Dan Patrick wanted. It's not what he thought he would find or get, the kind of headlines that he would produce. But I do think that this is really just icing on the cake, just the way you pointed out that Arizona audit ended up showing Biden had more votes than Trump. The actual very little evidence we've ever seen of voter fraud, it was actually on behalf of Donald Trump. So I think that's really interesting. And then, so Dan Patrick pushing for another special session on these issues. I'm going to say I think that's partially influenced by Donald Trump, obviously, is his good friend Donald Trump, who people have been saying, Patrick must be communicating with Trump pretty regularly, because we've mentioned on the pod the last couple of weeks, Trump has been making a lot of comments and decisions related to Texas, and so it seems like somebody has to be in his ear, and it very much everybody is skeptical and thinks that it must be Dan Patrick. He's pushing that Trump bill, but he also himself has a challenger from the right, a guy named Daniel Miller. He was the president of the Texas Nationalist Movement. And for those who don't know what that is the Texas secessionist movement. They want to secede from the rest of the United States. And apparently for them, Dan Patrick just not conservative enough.
No, so yes, he has drawn this challenger who is really towing the line with treason at this point, in terms of his political leanings there. But I mean, this is also what Abbott has to deal with too. And so you're seeing all of these folks threading a fine line. They're not conservative enough for a lot of their base, and they are drawing these challengers. And in Abbott's case, I think it really has pushed him into many seriously bad positions. We've seen that from, banning all the vaccine mandates to the extreme anti-abortion bill, Senate Bill 8. And so this is sort of Patrick also reaping what you've kind of sowed in Texas, by getting this extreme challenger.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. And as long as Greg Abbott doesn't have a Democratic opponent in the race, and of course he's actually already started running ads against Beto, assuming that Beto is going to get in the race. He has not yet, and so the pressure that Abbott is feeling in terms of electorally is coming from his own primary, despite the fact that we've covered numerous times here that these issues that you mentioned are he's not on the side of most Texans. Most Texans do not agree with him on the vaccine mandates and things like that. And so he is on the opposite side of most Texans, but unfortunately, we know how politics goes in Texas. For the Republicans, they only care about what goes on in the primary, and you have these extremists that are pushing him further, further, and further to the right. And then, it's getting harder with all these things that they've done, voter suppression issues, for a Democrat to legitimately, incredibly challenge them at the statewide level. And so they know that. And so this is sort of the natural outcome of both, not having a current credible challenger, having right-wing challengers on the primary, and then having a non-competitive statewide environment. It just basically says to Greg Abbott he can keep moving right as long as he wants, and not have to worry about the center even, let alone the left. So but to that point, Greg Abbott did get quite a few headlines and some heat for an interview he did earlier this week, which was with the right-wing news outlet Breitbart. And he did it at DK Royal Stadium, which is where the UT Longhorns play. And he did this. The subject was on opposing vaccine mandates, which, if you'll remember that, I think this may be another one of the bills Dan Patrick wants to pass, because it did not pass the House, but it was on the agenda. Greg Abbott put it on the agenda again because the folks on the right pressured him to ban vaccine mandates from any entity in the state, which would have included private businesses. There was a huge backlash from private business, against that idea, and it did stall in the House, and therefore did not pass. And so, yet Greg Abbott is going on the record saying how he still opposes this. So he's kind of trying to have it both ways, right? He's saying, I agree with the grassroots, but sorry, we didn't get that bill passed. And then he's probably winking at business community who has been banging down his door, opposing this move.
Right. Well, a lot of people, I think, were very upset with the University of Texas. I saw Charlie Bonner from Move Texas pointed out that, they didn't allow that organization to be on campus grounds to register voters because it's too partisan. Yet you have Abbott here conducting this interview. I think it was on the 50-yard line, with a Breitbart reporter. Although I guess I do have to point out, for anyone who did watch the second half of that UT Oklahoma State game, they just allow anything to happen up and down that football field. So you can't be surprised.
That's true. Yeah, that was rough.
It was.
Yeah, Oklahoma, the state, has had our number this year. I can definitely say that, between those two games. But yeah, I mean, we actually had a tweet too that we put out on this exact same thing, pointing that same thing out, that just a couple of weeks ago, the Lincoln Project, I believe, had an ad that they wanted to place that was sort of an anti-Greg Abbott ad, talking about his decisions about mandates and things like this and how awful they've been for the state and COVID. And then that ad was pulled from the Longhorn Network. And so, yes, a lot of people were pointing out the hypocrisy there, that the university, on one hand, says it doesn't want to be political, but then when the governor wants to be very political with a right-wing news organization, they give him literally the field. And that's, yeah, I mean, I think they're very right for pointing that out. And we actually had that tweet, I think, got hundreds and hundreds of retweets, so well over 1,000 likes on that, and apparently was retweeted by the Lincoln Project themselves. So retweeted the Texas Signal comments on that, because they themselves are really putting a lot of pressure on Greg Abbott and other governors who are really hurting their state and their people with their COVID decisions. Mm-hmm. And of course other issues as well, but I think that's the one that's really driving all this. So boy, yeah, so that's a mouthful. That's our governor and our lieutenant governor, folks. They're in a real competition right now. But earlier this year, one of the big things that came out really sort of before the redistricting stuff was the abortion ban, and we talked a lot about that earlier this year. Well, it looks now like SCOTUS is going to be expediting that, looking at the Texas abortion ban until that happens. The law is still in effect. Do you know anything, or you have any thoughts or comments about SCOTUS taking a look at that?
Sure. So they are doing an expedited review on November 1st. However, they did decline to stay the law, which, as you correctly pointed out, means it's still on the books. I would strongly suggest folks take a look at Sonia Sotomayor. She dissented against that halt, and she really, a lot of people have kind of pointed out that the myth of RBG maybe was a little bit too much, sort of a liberal fantasy. And in some ways, Sonia Sotomayor is kind of what a lot of people imagined RBG to actually be. And certainly in this dissent, she really, she points out the catastrophic effects that this law has had in Texas, and a lot of the damage that has inflicted, and just, again, how she is basically pointing out that this Supreme Court is just flagrantly ignoring the law and the Constitution by even just allowing this law to be on the books and to not stay until they hear this expedited review. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I would just point folks to see that, because she does the judge just very much, takes the state to task, and takes her fellow judges on her fellow right-wing judges on the court to task.
Good. Yeah, they definitely deserve it. And this court has gotten so political that it's hard to sort of take them seriously, and it seems like they aren't even taking their role as an independent branch of government seriously, and that's really unfortunate. But so I think that's we could segue over to Attorney General Ken Paxton. So this guy has, of course, been indicted for the last 6 years on accusations of securities fraud. However, there's also this big case where a large number of his senior staff quit in protest over basically saying that he was abusing his power. And then he tried to basically have their issues dismissed, because he basically said that whistleblower law did not apply to him, because I don't even know why. I can't remember. Is it because he's like because he's the attorney general, he's like the top prosecutor in the state, so he doesn't think that people can have a whistleblower claim against him? But the good news is there's an appeals court that is going to allow that lawsuit to proceed, and basically they're just accusing him of bribery and abuse of power. So he's up for re-election too, and of course we know he's got 3 at least Republican challengers and at least 2 Democratic challengers. But right now, it's hard to say that he's still not the favorite to win.
Right. Yeah, and just to refresh folks about this case, it has to deal with a donor of his named Nate Paul, who was being investigated by the FBI for, securities fraud or something. What Ken Paxton did was he then launched a investigation into the people investigating his donor friend. Mr. Paul. And so this is what prompted the whistleblowers to be like, wait, this is not what we're supposed to be doing in this office. And, they did not feel comfortable with this. Many of these people were handpicked by Paxton himself to be in that office. But they did not want to go along with this sham investigation. And interestingly enough, his donor friend Nate Paul has actually filed a lawsuit against agents with the FBI who I guess were investigating him, although Paxton is not mentioned in that lawsuit. But yeah, I mean, this is sort of this distortedness of what our attorney general has done. The fact that he is under investigation by the FBI. And the fact that, yeah, it's kind of a non-entity for Republicans, the two challengers right now, Bush and the other woman is
Ava Guzman.
Ava Guzman.
She's a judge. Yeah, she's a judge. She's, like I keep saying, she's the only one who's actually qualified to hold this position.
Yeah, and she and Prescott Bush don't seem to be getting much traction in their primary against him. And I mean that kind of speaks to where I think Republicans in the state are. They're fine with having a attorney general who is under investigation for serious offenses on top of already that felony securities fraud case.
But he's a Trump guy. Remember that. Like this through and through, Ken Paxton is a Trump guy. He was on the stage with Trump on January 6th in DC. So he is through and through MAGA and until the end, and is just as big of a grifter as any of these other folks. And so they just protect their own and they protect themselves. And so that's what they see. Trump has officially endorsed Ken Paxton. And even with all that, there was a House member who also a current Republican House member who resigned to run for the seat as well. Haven't heard his name come up recently either. So I
until you mentioned that, I kind of forgotten that he's from North Dallas, I believe.
Yeah, and it's great to not have him in the House anymore because he was a very Trumpy guy from the very beginning himself, and couldn't even really articulate why he was running against Ken Paxton because we all know why, because he's freaking indicted and he could go to jail and actually not be, able to serve in office. But they're so afraid to say anything against Trump or any of Trump's people that even though he's literally running a campaign against this guy, he won't say that. And so it's kind of like, oh, I don't know. I think that there's been some issues in the department, and even if he's completely innocent, it just kind of doesn't look great. Like, he couldn't just say, well, this guy's clearly corrupt and I am like leaving my current safe seat to challenge him because of that. Because I think Texas deserves to have a attorney general, the top prosecutor in the state, not be somebody who's criminally indicted for 6 years or takes care of the business. So, they're even when they do make little moves to show that they signal that they think there's an issue, that they're just so tight lipped when it comes to saying anything negative or anything could be construed as negative against Trump. So it's very interesting. And we talked a little bit about before the call about just how all this madness and all these folks at the highest level of Texas government really put a damper on Texas's reputation and people who are outside of the state, how they view Texas. And so we had a little bit of that on the D side and caused some controversy, I think, amongst Texas Democrats. Can you tell us what happened? It was our dear Vice President.
So the Virginia has a kind of an off-year gubernatorial election. So they have an upcoming election for their governor's race. It is between a Trump Republican named Glenn Youngkin and then Terry McAuliffe. I don't know about you, Joe, but I think I get 500 emails from Terry McAuliffe every day now.
Thank goodness I don't, but I'm surprised I don't actually.
I did live it. I did the DMV for a while, but so they're in a heated primary or a heated race at this moment, coming up on election day, and it's probably down to the wire. So Democrats are trying to get out the vote as much as they can in Virginia. So Terry McAuliffe was joined by our Vice President Kamala Harris, and she was making the point about why you don't want to elect an extreme right-wing person to be governor. And she was saying, we don't even have to imagine. We can see what's happening in Texas. I know you've seen the signs. Don't Texas my Virginia. So that's right, Virginia. Don't Texas my Virginia. And so that, I think, is a potent rallying cry for Terry McAuliffe, kind of similar to what we saw in California with the Gavin Newsom recall, where he brought up Texas a lot. But yes, a lot of people in Texas really did not feel great about that comment. Many are angry at the vice president, sort of saying, like, stop throwing us under the bus. We're not your punching bag.
Yeah, but we are your ATM, it seems like.
Yeah, for me, I'm kind of a little mixed bag here, where I think it's actually a good message for someone, running in a place like Virginia, where there are a lot of people who don't want to see that state turn into Texas. And the things that we've been talking about, whether it is that extreme abortion, anti-abortion bill, the voter suppression bill, the gerrymandering, permitless carry, these are not things that they want to see. And yeah, they are very afraid of turning, other states into Texas. So on that hand, I kind of understand why people say that. But on the other hand, I do feel like why people are very hurt by that.
Yeah, you can see why people would be, because we try really hard to fix things in the state, and that's still sort of the reputation, and it's undeserved. And if Texas was, the people of Texas in a majority really were that way, reflected in those bills you mentioned, they wouldn't need to do all this gerrymandering. They wouldn't need to do all this voter suppression stuff. But they know we aren't. And so it's more of our reputation and how we look. And I could even see Terry McAuliffe saying that, because he's running for governor of Virginia. But if it's our vice president, she still has to represent everybody in Texas. And so that's not really, I'm not like dinging her. I would not vote for her or something for saying that. But I would say, don't say that, especially if you plan to come back to Texas and rally our state next cycle to run for president, that you should just kind of be careful about pitting states versus each other, because we are the second largest state, and if we ever did turn blue, it would be formidable for Republicans to take that back. So I think we have to be careful. And that brings up this idea that I mentioned to you before about a swear jar for Texas, where if you're outside of Texas, you're not a Texan, and you say something bad about Texas, then you should have to donate to a progressive organization doing, on the ground work in Texas. We need some type of national swear jar for Texas, because this happens a lot, and I think it would happen less if people. Yeah, if we had that. So we need to somehow commit to getting people to do that. That'd be great, I think, for the movement. But there are a couple other things I wanted to mention too. Like in Texas, we've always tried to talk a little bit about cultural stuff, but I find it interesting that Delta 8, which is found in the cannabis, in hemp products, as CBD also contains this chemical element called Delta 8, has now been ruled illegal in the state of Texas. I have never used Delta 8 specifically for anything, but I have started to see these signs and stores pop up everywhere about Delta 8, and you've probably seen CBD stuff pop up all over the place. And so lots and lots and lots of stores across Texas, entire businesses are built around this chemical compound that people use. And now, really without much fanfare, the Texas Department of Health, and I believe it's State Services, has ruled and deemed it illegal. And so it's very unclear what's going to happen with that. There's a lot of small businesses with tons of inventory on their shelf that's technically illegal now. So what are they going to do with it? I don't even know if they can sell it to someone else. But anyway, I think that's a pretty interesting thing, because there's a growing movement around legalization of marijuana in general. Texas is supposed to be so pro-business, and here we are shutting down more businesses during the pandemic, which are going to be.
Two of like one Greg Abbott's favorite Texas transplants that he likes to talk about, Joe Rogan and Elon Musk. They're big cannabis people. I'm curious to hear what their thoughts are on this.
Well, I'll tell you what Elon's thought might be. He's probably more concerned about selling Teslas in the state of Texas because I don't know if you are aware, but you cannot buy a Tesla in the state of Texas.
Mhm.
So again, all this talk, and it's just talk about being pro-business. It used to be real, but now it is, again, it's just a reputation we're rolling with. Because if you look at point by point, I mean, the rest of the country is changing and being more dynamic, and what their economy looks like, and Texas is not. We're just leaning in further and further into oil and gas when the whole rest of the world is pulling away from it. And we're so set up to be ahead of the curve on all these industries, cannabis included, and we still are just kind of in the stone age.
And well, Oklahoma has gone the opposite direction,
Yeah,
where they have really, tried to create this new business. So, we talked about on the football field, Oklahoma sort of having
yeah,
a field day with Texas there. It's similar here. And, this is Patrick, this is something that he has been staunchly against. There was a little bit of movement maybe to see a little bit more on the legalization side in Texas, and that was stomped out very quickly. I mean, we've also just mentioned previously, like there's the extremely unfair sentences that have been handed out over, non-offensive crimes, including drug possession or selling, things like marijuana. So you have that criminal justice component of it, but then B, this is a huge economy, and it's, I haven't really traveled much in the last 18 months, but before COVID, I remember seeing all these shops, and they were starting to pop up a little bit here in Texas with CBD. But now, yeah, you've completely, put a lot of small businesses, mom and pop shops in danger here.
yeah, absolutely. um and I know that there's some movement here, like I say, in Texas to start moving away from that. But yeah, Oklahoma apparently is booming with weed business right now, and they didn't even fully legalize it. They just have a medical, it's technically medical, but I think it's so lenient on the medical side that almost anybody can sort of get it. So we're seeing lots of folks traveling to Oklahoma from Texas. um and so, anyways, before we wrap up, I have one more thing. I'm a Houston Astros fan. I was born in Beaumont, grew up going to Houston Astros games, going to Houston to watch them play. Throughout my entire childhood, they would choke every time they got anywhere close to the playoffs. So I have to say, the last several years, watching the Astros become world champions, and then now beating the Red Sox in the AL finals is really awesome. And so good luck to the Houston Astros. So
Well, yeah, good luck. Good luck to your Astros.
you're not much of a Rangers fan either, though, right? I think we talked
Yeah,
about this last time.
I root for the Rangers. That's kind of the hometown team. Although,
Yeah.
let's see, this season was a little brutal out there, from my understanding.
Yeah, they did get a new stadium though.
They did get a news. I've heard it's very nice. Um, it's we'll see.
Yeah.
Yeah, they opened it. Oh, it was supposed to open, in 2020, and then with all of with COVID stuff. But everyone who's gone there, they seem to enjoy it. So
Yeah, I went in 2019 while they were constructing it, and attached to it is like a big restaurant slash bar, like sports bar thing, but
mhm,
it's huge. And I
mhm.
think it's the biggest screen, at least in Texas, but maybe the whole country. It's just a giant TV screen. And it's like, it's like sort of attached to the back half of the baseball stadium. And so that was already open, and you could like go in there and like hang out, and then you could like kind of go out and see where they were building the baseball stadium. So
Yeah, it does look really cool. Yeah, I went to go see Paul McCartney. It's just like 2019, and yeah, they were just almost pretty much done with the facility. And I remember at the time, and famous last words of like, oh, 2020, it'll be a great time to go to a baseball game there. And then, sure enough,
yeah.
yeah,
Well, maybe next season,
maybe next
because y'all season is over.
season.
So Just you got to pull for the Astros because they're the last Texas team. But anyways, well, thanks for everyone for hanging in there with us. Stay in touch. TexasSignal.com. We will definitely be, keeping up with all the latest twists and turns and these federal cases, from the abortion ban to Ken Paxton whistleblower lawsuit. So we'll be keeping up with all that and all of the redistricting twists and turns as well with these maps that are going to court, and we'll see what's going to happen. As far as I know right now, I think we're looking at a December filing period to start for folks to start filing for office. Now that we have these maps, there was some uncertainty about that depending on when they would actually finally pass the maps. So we will keep everybody up to date on that and make sure that you stay tuned with us and follow us on social media. Join the conversation on Twitter at Texas Signal. And yeah, that's all I got. So until next time, later, y'all.
Bye, guys.